welcome to the Etsy podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts. This is a podcast that is dedicated, committed in fact, we are committed to helping you navigate the waters you're in after years of interviewing people who are working at the intersections of art and leadership and religion and spiritual formation and commerce, in hopes that those conversations informed your life. Producer Dan Portnoy and I decided that the most helpful thing I could do was to actually take your questions directly, which is actually the thing I hope I enjoy most, is being a coach and helping folks to do the work they want to make in the world while becoming who they want to be in the process. So this is kind of an expression of that. This is an arm of that same work. So I took, every week I take a set of questions from Instagram. I'll answer them by text at Instagram, and then I'll take three or four, sometimes two, depending on the questions, and build an episode around them. These are 4 questions this week that I'm really excited to actually get into, the ending of which, the fourth of which will lead us right to kind of a new way we've been ending this podcast. But let's dive in head first and jump on this question. Really interesting question. A great way to ask it is, I'm having a hard time distinguishing what's legalism and what's genuine, and what are genuine values and ethics. Hard time distinguishing legalism and genuine values and ethics. So a couple of pieces. One, no value is in and of itself legalist. In other words, like, a value is simply a value. What legalism is a posture I take towards a value. In other words, I can have a conclusion, it's a set of values, or it's an ideology, like a whole ideology, or maybe even it's just like an approach to life, or approach to like food, like whatever it is. I have an opinion about something. The opinion, the conclusion, the value, none of that is legalist in and of itself. You might not agree with it, and we'll come back to that. What makes a thing legalist, when it becomes legalism, when I decide that is what's true for everyone. In other words, I have found a primary and fundamental truth about value in the grand sense, and that this is the way things are, and I'm unwilling to change. And here's another caveat to it. I'm unwilling to change regardless of evidence. So one of the things that makes a thing legalist is that I want to put that on everyone else. Tricky piece is, if I actually find something valuable, I want you to experience that. So a value can come across as legalist, or like someone can come across like a legalist if they're just really excited. You know, we talk about vegans and CrossFitters a lot, because, you know, vegans and CrossFitters tend to talk a lot about veganism and CrossFit. It doesn't necessarily make their thing legalist. Here's where we tend to cross the line. Where we tend to cross the line is not just that I think this would be good for you, but if you don't do it, you're wrong. In other words, I want to invite you. If I found something that's of value, that's actually of value to me, and I think it's valuable, and I think it's healthy, and think it's good, then I should, in love, try to pass that on to other people. I become kind of a jerk when I say, if you don't do it, you're wrong. So if you're a CrossFitter and you're like, yeah, but these people, like, you should go to CrossFit gyms, and people say, no, I already have, like I do. I go to the YMCA and I work out with people who are in their 70s. And the CrossFitter says, like, well, you're working out wrong. Well, now we're in legalism. Does that make some sense? I hope it makes a little bit of sense. So legalism is a posture. It's the way we apply our values and ethics. And the primary difference between legalism and not legalism is my willingness to evolve. So the second part of the initial answer is, a thing becomes legalist not just when I want to push on other people and tell them they're wrong if they don't go my way. It also becomes legalist when I'm unwilling for that value to evolve and change given evidence. In other words, I'm 23 years old, and I've discovered something about leadership or religion or fitness. And then when I'm 43 years old, regardless of the fact that my body, my brain, my relationships, like, won't respond to this thing anymore, I still think this thing is true. This happens in religion. It happens in leadership. It happens in business. It happens in fitness. That this thing that used to work, because it used to work, I'm just locked in on it. That's legalism as well, and it actually affects me negatively. So no particular value is legalist in and of itself. Legalism is a posture that actually is a posture we take towards our and with our values that over the course of time erodes the actual value of those values. It actually kills it. It's no longer good for me, and it's not good for my relationships. The last thing I want to say about the difference between legalism and values is we tend to find legalist the values and ethics of other people. It's really easy. It's much easier for us to look at someone's application of their ethics and of their ethic or of their values and call them a legalist. And they might not be being legalist about it. They just might be really committed. They might just be like actually disciplined. Discipline in our values, discipline in our ethics, discipline in our health can look like legalism. The friend who won't go out, like if you're going out, they're not going to have that drink. And you're like, bro, don't be a legalist or whatever the thing is. Self-discipline can look like legalism, but it oftentimes is not. We tend to apply the label of legalism to other people far more than we do ourselves. And no one identifies legalism in other people quite like the legalist. So if I'm a legalist and I think things work a certain way and you don't do them a certain way, what I will probably do is call you a legalist. You're a legalist. When actually it's my legalism. It's kind of leaking out in the relationship. So I hope that's a helpful answer. Constant conversation. Second question from this week that I loved. How do you move past being disheartened by someone's choice that impacts the group? How do you move past someone's choice? How do you move past being disheartened by someone's choice that impacts the group? So the question in the broad, to break it down, is someone's made a decision that doesn't just impact you individually, it impacts like a whole group of people. So this could be like a business leader, this could be a pastor, this could be the head of a family. Someone makes a decision and apparently this didn't work out. Things went poorly for other people or what have you, but it wasn't just an individual, it actually is a whole group of people. So how do you move past that? We never really do move past our injuries. Not really. And I think it's a mistake to think that we eventually do. I think our injuries become part of who we are. We learn to live with them. We learn to carry them. One of the gifts of the scriptures is that the crucified and resurrected body of Jesus after the resurrection actually bears the marks of his crucifixion. So when Jesus in the scriptures is resurrected, he actually has the marks on his body of his death. I think that's a model, at the very least, for what it looks like to actually have been hurt and then to like move on. I don't think by moving on, we ever just move away from those injuries or they no longer play a part in our lives. We don't move. This is move past. I don't think we move past getting hurt. I don't think we move past even being disheartened. What I think we learn to do is we learn to carry those injuries. We don't move past injuries. We'll learn to carry those injuries. Now, in this context, we're talking about like a whole group of persons. If that whole group of persons is actually injured by like a leader's decision, then it becomes how do I want to say this? It becomes, this might not come off the way I want it to. We have the opportunity then to share and carry that injury with one another. I don't mean to cheapen this by saying like everything is an opportunity, although there's a way that that's true. But insofar as the group has been injured by someone else, by a leader, don't try to move past it. Learn to carry that with one another. In fact, this is the way I said it. I said we rarely move past our injuries. More often we carry them. The question might be, how will you carry that injury together as a group? Start by giving others permission to carry it instead of moving on. In other words, if everyone's been hurt and everyone's wounded, or this group is like in the same place of stuckness and disheartenedness, maybe it looks like having those conversations and say, I'll carry that with you. How is that feeling? Like I feel the same way, and actually just entering into it together and allowing it to be part of how you are and part of who you are together. In other words, this person made a decision. It injured the group. That's part of who you are now. Instead of moving past that, learn to practice that together by actually identifying this is a wound we all share. It's one of the greatest, most beautiful things we get to do as persons is actually share our wounds. So maybe the question here isn't how to move past a decision that a leader made, but actually how do we live with it now as a group. That in and of itself is a leadership choice, is to say, I'm going to step out and say, I have been injured. I'm not okay. I'm disheartened. I'm sad. I'm actually kind of like unmotivated, and saying that in a way that it invites other people to say that out loud. It's not so that we can stay there and stay stuck, but so we can actually carry that wound and carry that disheartenedness as we move forward into other things and into a next season. Third question this week is a broad question. Someone asked me, I had mentioned contemplative prayer. She says, you mentioned contemplative prayer in the podcast. Can you talk more about that? One of the reasons I talk about contemplative prayer, it is a kind of prayer. I learned a lot reading Thomas Merton and in my spiritual direction training. One of the differences between contemplative prayer and other kinds of prayer, things like intercessory prayer, contemplative prayer is in general defined by a posture of receptivity. That instead of prayer as a way to get something done or prayer as a way to express myself, contemplative prayer generally is marked by a posture that's more like this, is making myself available to God, to the world, to my own soul. It's a posture of openness and receptivity in which I can be formed. I can be loved. I'm not trying to get God to do something. I'm not trying to intercede because I hope that someone else, their life gets better. I'm not using prayer like a tool, which is oftentimes the way we use prayer. Contemplative prayer is a posture of prayer in which I am open to whatever it is that God has for me. I put myself in a position to be cared for. I put myself in a position to hear if God wants to speak. That's what I mean by contemplative prayer. If you want to dig into the world of contemplative prayer, a couple of avenues. One is set up an appointment and let's get into that'd be a great spiritual direction conversation. Like what would contemplative prayer look like for you? But if you want to read some contemplative prayer works, beginning with people like Thomas Merton and Carlo Corretto, and getting into some of the foundations of what folks mean by contemplative prayer, I'd begin with those two names. That's what I mean when I reference contemplative prayer. This last question, we're going to hang out here for a little bit. How to love and care well for a friend with a terminal diagnosis. Oof. How to care and love well a friend with a terminal diagnosis. Heady question up to a certain point. These are questions that tend to be heavy until we begin to answer them. And then when we get into conversations with one another about death and about loss, we tend to feel a different kind of lightness. So I'm really glad you asked this question. The way I said it here, and I'll expound a bit, straight talk. So the inevitability of death, the inevitability of things ending, of life ending. There are two things. Well, there are several things. Among the short list of things we really talk our way around, death is one of them. We say things, we use phrases like they've passed on. That's an okay way to say it to a certain degree, but it also dodges a few things. We've lost them. We find this language about death that like softens the blow and helps us to kind of find some workarounds. One of the most important things we can do as persons, as human beings, one of the most important things we can do as leaders, as artists, one of the most important things we can do as human beings is to not just come to grips with, but to become actually acquainted. So not just like, don't just tolerate, but actually become acquainted with the inevitability that everything that makes your life work right now is going to end, including your own lungs. You're going to die. I'm going to die. Everyone dies. Everything dies. Everything ends. Which is to say, we can learn from our friends who are dying. We can learn from our friends who have lost. We can learn from our friends who have been through the loss of everything. And really specific in this context, we can learn from our friends who are actually staring their mortality square in the face And maybe part of what that looks like is our love and care for them. What often happens is when someone is granted like something like a terminal diagnosis, or even if they're just sick, we move into a posture of care and love it's kind of a position of power. I am not dying. You are, so I can help you. One of the switches here is to put that person in a position to teach us. What are you asking questions? What is this like for you? And that does a thing for them as well. Like they get to say things out loud that they might not otherwise have had permission to say. This sucks, and then here's why this sucks, and this is the thing I'm seeing now that I didn't see. What are how has this changed how you're living your days? How is this changing your sleeping patterns? How is this changing how you're eating? Asking questions of the person who's actually in that position, not as a resource, but as a human being. Because all of us actually in some way, shape, or form live right there on the precipice of the end of our own lives. We're constantly there. Someone who's been handed a terminal diagnosis has just been told by a doctor that they're much closer than you are, but you're both in the same position. So one of the ways we can care for our friends with terminal illness is to not move into a position of power and try to help them, but instead of humanize the actual experience and let them be human right there on the edge of their own mortality. One of the reasons it's important to do this is because not only does it actually connect us interpersonally when someone is dying, but because, like I said, quite literally everything in your life that works right now and everything that makes your life work right now is going to end. The relentless inevitability of the ending of all things is a spiritual practice and discipline. It's a spiritual reality. Coming to grips with the fact that, and becoming acquainted with the fact that your career, your primary relationships, all that kind of comes to an end, actually helps us to live into those things and actually receive those things as the gift that they are. I'm going to get this. Lutz? I blanked on his name. Stutz. I think it's Stutz. Phil Stutz, in his book, True and False Magic, says that one of the ways to think about death is that death is actually a portal through which we experience more life. Death is an experience. Death is like a portal through which we experience more life. Sometimes what that means is on the other side of this particular death, there are things available to us that we didn't know. And if you've lost a job and then come onto the other side, maybe you figured out there's actually an experience of life that, like, me holding on to this job is keeping me from. Or you've lost a relationship you thought was everything, and on the other side of that relationship, your whole life didn't end. Well, there's more life on the other side of that. Or even in this light, becoming intimately acquainted with the reality that at some point I will stop breathing, I will stop being alive. It can hopefully lighten the ground beneath my feet, because because I don't have an endless number of days, I get to receive the day I'm in. And now there's more life available to me here and now. Death is a portal through which we get to experience more life. In talking to our friends who are either dying or have experienced significant death, personally, professionally, and otherwise, actually helps us to live more completely, more fully, and more humanly. It's one of the reasons that Scott Erickson and I put together this book, and that's how I'm going to wrap things up. And so how we're wrapping up the podcast nowadays is reading a poem from this book that actually comes out in October of 2025. So I'm going to wrap it up this way by reading this prayer and poem. May I have wisdom and patience to follow the signs my disappointments leave for me. I want to learn to trust my saddened soul to tell me truths I might not learn otherwise. Teach me to feel disappointment as the way my soul tells me I wanted something else. I wanted something better. Remind me I'm still learning. Remind me I'm still becoming. Remind me I'm not done yet. And I can choose more wisely tomorrow. Until next time.